Professor An and Professor Chen for a very interesting and very useful presentation as well as discussion. With that, thank you very much, Professor An and Professor Chen. And let me
Thank
now
you,
move
Arief.
to the third presentation by Professor Aizenman, the Robert R. and Catherine A. Dockson Chair in Economics and International Relations, University of Southern California. Professor Aizenman is also a research associate in the National Bureau of Economic Research in the US. His paper is shared with Professor Jamal Sadoui from the Paris 8 University. But no, yeah. So, Professor Aizenman, the time is yours, please. Or is it Jamal? Are you the one who's going to make the presentation?
I think Joshua will start the presentation.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, by the way, the paper will be discussed by our colleague here from Japan, Professor Masashige Hamano, professor at the School of Political Science in Waseda University of Tokyo. But yeah, while waiting for Professor Aizenman to come up. Joshua? Okay. You're still on mute.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, we got you, Professor Aizenman.
Yeah.
Please.
So let me acknowledge the opportunity to discuss openness and comparative advantage, focusing on the Asian successes and Asian failure. So let me point out that this study relies on data covering 65 years from 1960. And the aim is to decipher the role of openness and comparative advantages, accounting for the Asian successes and failures. We confirm the structural heterogeneity, and in a way, the econometric part is exploiting this. So I will start by overviewing the main results, and I'll use some charts to highlight the main results without going through all the details. And Jamal will continue with giving you a quick overview of the methodology and the concluding remarks. So the growth process in Asia is conditional on institutional capacity, effective investment, and external positioning. Commodity dependence dampens persistence, but magnifies investment impact. Post-global financial crisis economies show more efficient investment growth transmission, likely reflecting learning effects. Now, we are utilizing the dataset GeoC index, measuring the geoeconomic connectedness, and we are using this in order to understand the possibility that greater diversification among the geopolitical frontier is beneficial, and we are finding that measuring this issue, the impact is small and positive. It is statistically significant only in the context of high human capital situations, which means that integration leads to more vigorous advantages where it comes with education and skills. Economists with more geopolitical, well-balanced geographic trade among the competing blocs is definitely an advantage. It allows higher persistence of growth and more robust effect on investment. This means that diversification of patterns of on an ideological basis enhance resilience in the long run. And while the record of growth across most regions in Asia in the past 30 years is high, it conceals major issues. So let me discuss, we were asked to discuss potential failures. So we decided to mention two. A fair share of Asian countries underutilize the growing share of well-educated women, at times that the declining net fertility that is characterizing most of the countries in the region should be mitigated by dismantling the glass ceiling facing educated women. Another dimension is that the quality of human capital is essential for the future prospect of countries. But in various countries, there is underinvestment in the quality of human capital and overinvestment in time in school, where education occasionally is focusing on time and the resources are allocated in an inefficient way. And this is definitely a drawback for countries that would like to focus on export-led growth and improving their efficiency. To put the discussion in the context of the global picture, here you can see that the distribution of growth across regions during the window of about 35 years. So not surprisingly, South Asia is leading with a growth rate of on average of 5.5. East Asia and Pacifics, 5%, Sub-Sahara and Africa, and the Middle East and North Africa, about 3%, North America, about 2.6, and Latin America, 2.3, and Europe and Central Asia, 2%. So there is no question that on average, South Asia and the Asia, East Asian and the Pacific are leading in terms of the performance. Having said that, there is a lot of heterogeneity. So let us point that the growth performance, of course, does not guarantee future results, and the rise of geopolitical tensions, a time of aging global population and growing exposure to natural calamities imposes new challenges. We find that investing is good for sustaining growth only when the institutions and human capital are above the median in the region. And there is a synergy between human capital and institutional quality. This is in line with the growing importance of human capital in increasing the ability to adjust to the new technologies at times that on average, more than 70% of the GDP of countries are services. Countries that underinvest in human capital are frequently at the mercy of their commodity endowment And they are forced really to specialize mostly in relatively low value-added exports. And commodity-dependent countries often have low human capital due to the resource scarce, which can cause political and economic instabilities, rent-seeking, reducing investment in non-commodity sectors, ignoring the importance of education, and the Dutch disease is characterized some of these situations. And because of the high volatility in the price of commodities, and because of rent seeking and the like, this implies that countries in the region that are stuck in that situation are propagating a cycle of poverty and other development. Now, maybe the best way to look at the big picture is to focus on several charts, and the observations that we'll show, we believe are consistent with the flying geese interpretation that was the focal point of various papers in the past. In terms of the big picture, we use annual data covering from 1960, and we are focusing on panel of 24 Asian economies, focusing on the countries that with population at least of 2 million. Over that period, the average economic growth is 5%, and the standard deviation is almost also 5%. So there is a large dispersion. The average investment is 25%, and the standard deviation is 8%. And the first two moments of population growth are by now 1.57%, which is well below the fertility. And this indicates that the demographic transition has reached most Asia. The average inflation is quite elevated, 10%, and with the strong dispersion, with standard deviation of 25%. And on the average of cumulative number of bilateral economic trade integration agreements remains small. So let me illustrate the heterogeneity of the region in several charts, and then I'll jump to a two-dimensional chart that are summarizing to a degree a fair share of the multivariate regressions that we are running. So here you can see the pattern of growth in the region, where more reddish growth implies higher growth rates. And notice that there is a large heterogeneity that is the focal point of the regression. Once that we are focusing on average growth and state capacity, the colors here are indicating that there is also large dispersion in state capacity. Now, to be more precise, let me, oops, I jumped too fast. So let me focus on several interesting observations. In this chart, we are focusing on the association between institutional score, which is measured horizontally, and economic growth. Now, the blue bubbles are developing economies. The reddish bubbles are advanced economies, mostly in the Pacifica and the like. And the area of the bubble is proportionate to the real GDP. And definitely, glancing it, there is a profound positive association between institutional score and economic growth. China is at the top, and definitely the data is consistent with the fact that countries that are successful in taking off are ending up with the solo type of convergence. So let me turn to the next chart. that has almost the same features. The association, but this time we are measuring human capital and economic growth, and we detect the same pattern in the context of the positive association between the two. Moving to the next. Here we are focusing on the export connectedness against economic growth. And definitely being well diversified in terms of your connectivity is a major advantage. And notice that China is doing very well on this dimension, and that say the more advanced countries are not doing as well as the cloud of other countries. So this is related to the point that in the present geopolitical climate, investment in better connectivity is solidifying the growth performance. The state capacity against economic growth deliver the same outcome. And of course, these countries, the advanced economies, are growing at a slower rate as part of the convergence according to the solo model. So let me focus now on this figure, focusing on evolution of Asian economic growth from 1960. And notice that the growth fluctuated around 5% in Asia between 1960 and 2024. This remarkable performance defied the predictions in going back to the beginning of this period that Asia will stay poor for a very long time. The difference between the first and the third growth quartiles shows a less dispersed real economic growth after 1990, supporting, in a way, the flying geese model. And the region has experienced 3 big shocks during the past 30 years. The first was the Asian crisis. The second was the global financial crisis. And the third, the COVID crisis. And the chart also suggests that the adjustment to the Asian crisis was required changing policies, and the adjustment followed a deep decline in the performance of these countries, but the recovery was relatively fast. This may be related to the fact that it was at the background of a robust growth of the global economy. The global financial crisis, interestingly enough, was less of a shock, and this may be related to upgrading the policies in the region following the Asian crisis. COVID turned out to be a very deep shock. So let me stop here, and Jamal will continue. Please.
Thank you, Joshua. Maybe I can also share my screen. Okay, I hope you can see my screen now. So now, after showing this preliminary graph evidence, we want to display the results of econometric regressions that will be a kind of a validation of a flying geese model. But we are going to look at that. So we have an estimation strategy. Thank you so much, Arief. We have an estimation strategy which is based on the standard two-way fixed effect model, where we will have a country-specific heterogeneity, geographic, culture, long-run institutions, control with fixed effect. We also include common global shocks, as we saw that the region has been affected by big shocks during the period. So we have in equation 1 a standard solo growth model with a convergence term, which is rho, and a lagged term, which is the volatility, which is phi. We include a set of control, which will be a vector of interest for us. Of course, we have an investment share of a GDP, the log of population, in the log level of the population to have the scale agglomeration channel, which has been very important in the region, and the population growth, which is the solo capital dilution channel. We also include the inflation and the cumulative number of economic trade agreements. So the identification is relies on the exogeneity of a control. Of course, it's very important to include the fixed effect and we have lagged regressor to mitigate the reverse causality. So now, we can also add that in this specific specification, we separate between a population growth and the log of population in order to separate scale effects from capital dilution, which seems to be very important in some populated country in Southeast Asia and in South Asia. So we have also a real GDP, which allows to separate between capital extensive margin and intensive margin growth. This has been something also very important in Asia. We have a dynamic model because we have a lagged term in equation 1. So we use a three complementary approaches to see the effect of this, including this lagged variable. So these approaches as described here don't need to be very technical, but when you have this lagged variable, you need to either to apply a correction or to consider that the bias will reduce this lagged term. So what are the results? Just a small summary of the results before showing the table. So the real GDP growth coefficient fluctuate between 25 and 27%. So you have somehow a low persistence of growth over this long period. The convergence term of the whole coefficient is 2.6, so it implies a conditional convergence, which is around 26 years, which can be considered as a long or not. The coefficient of capital accumulation, which is very important in terms of policy making, is quite strong, around 7 or 8, between 7 and 8%. The population scale effect seems to be quite big and significant. And we show that the population size was a very important driver of economic growth in Asia, at least in the 90s and maybe at the beginning of the 2000s. The consumer price inflation coefficient is not significant because, of course, the relation between inflationary growth is a relation which is non-linear and time varying, and the specification has to be modified to understand this link. And finally, the coefficient on economic integration is 0. That's why I raised the question at the beginning at the keynote, because it seems that growth has not been driven by formal economic integration, but by de facto economic integration, which is a different way of proceeding to economic integration if you compare to what Europe made with the common agricultural policy, for example. So here we have the table with the baseline results. So it is what I just presented before. So we have around 1,400 observation, and the coefficient have an expected sign, and they are quite stable into the free specification, showing that the model at least are not affected by this nickel bias. So what we are going to do in the next is to use, so we have, of course, the correct sign, and investment is growth enhancing in all the regression. We are going to use interaction term to see a nonlinear effect, for example, with the commodity-dependent countries. It seems that investment has a stronger effect when a country are commodity dependent. After the GFC, it seems that investment was also very much important. And of course, if institutions are good and if human capital is are higher, the investing may produce a higher growth effect. It goes into the same direction with human capital. What is interesting and not yet in the literature is the role of geoeconomic connectedness. So geoeconomic connectedness, as mentioned by Joshua, is the fact that your trade partners are diverse from a geopolitical point of view. So there is this notion of connector countries. Actually, the advanced economies in the sample, like New Zealand, Japan, and Australia, are not diversified geopolitically because they trade more with democracies and countries that have the same geopolitical alignment. So it seems that the more diversified you are, the more you have a growth. It corresponds to the fact that basically countries like Vietnam, Indonesia, Malaysia are indeed connector countries. They trade with everybody without any, until now, until Trump maybe, and without any consideration in terms of geopolitical things. So in terms of the demographic channels, we have the scale effect, which is strong. It is especially strong when the institution and the human capital are high, have high values. It means that this the scale effect, this we would say extensive margin for growth, has been especially strong when you had high institution and high human capital settings. The population growth is strongly negative for highly commodity-dependent countries, low institution settings, and in less to less extent, the human capital is higher. So in terms of high geoeconomic connectedness, the penalty is large in magnitude, but less significant. So the global pattern here, introducing this interaction term to understand the nonlinearities, is that the market size helps the size of a labor market, the labor force actually also. But when institutions are weak or when the economy is commodity extensive, actually this population effect is not so strong. So this is something which is interesting with the worrying fertility trend. Fertility trend are worrying everywhere in the world, but also in Asia. Inflation is muted, which is interesting because it relates with this, after the World War II, in the EU countries, you had a jointly high growth and high inflation, which is correspond to what we have in the sample for Asia, 5% of growth and 5% of inflation. It's something that you can see. But after the GFC, it seems that inflation has a negative effect of growth. And this is something which has to be very carefully managed by the policymakers. And yeah, so we don't found any effect of economic integration proxy, which corresponds to this, so to speak, de jure economic integration. It does not mean that in the future economic integration could not be reinforced by this kind of agreements. So here you have a table, and what you can see, you can focus on the investment line to not to spend too much time on that, and you can see that in the second column that investment is especially strong, especially much more important after the GFC, meaning that that's something that is interesting to explore. And then in the same way, if you look at this investment row, you can see that when the human capital is high, the investment in physical capital interacts with the human capital, and growth is more accelerated. So maybe we can conclude on the observed heterogeneity among Asian countries in terms of growth. So you have, of course, what we expect with works of Acemoglu and his co-author. We have a correlation which is between economic growth and the institutional score. And this is something that we confirm again, that institutional capacity has been a key driver in Asia catch-up process. Something which is also interesting to note is that in order to escape potentially this middle income trap, investing both in physical capital and human capital are essential. Because if you only invest in physical capital, or growth regression indicates that it will not be growth enhancing. So that's very, very important to note that. And it is something that has already occurred partially in China, Korea, and Singapore. So this relationship is stronger in Asia because if human capital is already very high, you have diminishing returns. But for Asia, unfortunately, there is still a room for improving human capital, and actually it correlates well, or it fits well with this flying geese model of Asian economy, which is a very interesting model. And here it seems that regional development have been following this flying geese. So maybe Japan, Australia, and New Zealand are the future of other countries which are near from this stage of transforming extensive growth into intensive growth with moderate GDP higher GDP per capita, but a higher technological, to be closer to a technological frontier. So we can also make some conclusions about the fact that the two important things about the geopolitical landscape, something that could be problematic to for the region, is the fact that these countries, most of these countries like China, Korea, Vietnam, Malaysia, were connector countries at the heart of the global value chain. So they enjoy boost on growth because of this position. In a more geopolitical fragmented world, it would be more difficult to enjoy these properties. So this is something that the countries need to think about. And finally, I can add a small point about recalling the key features. So institutional capacity, building institutional capacity, human capital, and being at the heart of the global value chain. It means that trading that very diverse geopolitically oriented country has been very important. The commodity dependence is also something that it magnifies investment impact. And finally, in the post-GFC landscape, improved the quality of human capital is very important to improve investment to growth transmission. So I can conclude on that to keep the timing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Aizenman and Professor Sadoi. Very interesting and nice presentation, and also thank you for keeping the time. Now let me move to the discussion by Professor Masashige Hamano. Professor Hamano, please.
Yes. Yes.
Time is
Can I
yours.
share my screen?
For sure you can.
Yes. Do you see my screen?
Yes, I can see it. Thank you.
Okay. Yes. So thank you very much for having me. It's very honorable to be in this, very interesting meeting and exchange very good opinions with other scholars and policymakers. So, I first of all, I really liked the paper. So let me just put my discussion on the full screen. I hope it comes. Takes time. I don't know why. Do you see screen now?
Not yet shown on my screen.
Not yet.
Yes.
It is coming. I think it comes.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah. So I think the paper provides really a comprehensive view of the Asian economy, and I think it's not easy to do this type of job because as Jusha and Jamer were already mentioning, in these Asian countries there are many heterogeneities, but the paper somehow is, I think, very successful in provide overview and a very comprehensive messages about this group of economies in the world. And so let me first summarize what the paper is doing. So that this is basically a econometric paper. So it uses the data of 24 Asian economies from 1960 to 2024. And, the paper point out key drivers of the economic growth for these countries. So first is the institutional quality and human capital, and also external positioning like geoeconomic connectedness. So this last variable, geoeconomic connectedness is really, I think, a contribution of the paper. And what I got from the analysis is that, investment becomes more efficient, conditional on the institutional quality, human capital development, and also geoeconomic connectedness, which is, in terms of impact, can be smaller compared to human capital and institutional quality, but significant in the analysis. And also the paper shows many heterogeneities, depending on commodity dependence, diversified economies in many dimensions, and also before and post global financial crisis. And let me again summarize what Jamer explained. So this is a main empirical equation. So dependent variable is economic growth in the region. Y it stands for the real GDP. And so the real GDP growth today depends on the past growth of the real GDP. And also they do include this convergence term. So the GDP growth of today depend on the level of GDP in the past. And we expect that this coefficient is smaller if we believe somehow a convergence or a kind of flying geese stories. And what's more important is in this capital xi t minus 1. So these are the controls of these regressions that include investment, populations, population growth. So the population captures, the market effect, the size of the economy, but population growth can reflect capital dilution effect, with many people using fixed amount capital, the efficiency of the capital is going to be lower. This type of effect, and they do also include inflation and economic integration with other time and country fixed effect. And they do also provide some robustness analysis with respect to their regressional strategies. So my first comment is on the on the specification, but let me recap the table again. So as Jamel showed, so these columns I think the most important throughout the analysis, and specifically if you split out countries into two groups according to many criteria. But among these criteria, I think the institutional capacities is a key to improve the impact of investment on the economic growth. High institutional countries can benefit more from the investment, and the same is true for the human capital. So with high quality of human capital, the efficiency of investment is larger, and this is also true for the geopolitical connectedness. But coefficients are significant, but the number can be relatively smaller compared to other. Only for the high. If it becomes high, it gives really strong impact. But for the low, and it's not can be small. So my comment is on the specification of the regression analysis. It's a bit technical, but since I'm doing usually macroeconomics, I really like to discuss, forward-looking issues. So from my view, so they, try to explain the GDP growth today, depending on the many explanatory variables, including, past investments, populations, inflation, etc. But specifically, I think investment, for instance, can be very much forward-looking. So it can be potentially influenced by, the perspective of the future economic growth. So if this is the case, we have a very classical endogeneity problem in the specification. And the same can be true for the demographics, so the populations, for instance. So, how many kids I'm going to have will depend on my, perception of the future economy. If I think Japan is a very good country, maybe I get more motivated to have kids, etc. And same is also true for the inflation, right? The inflation is a typical forward-looking variable in macroeconomics. So I would like to see a brief discussion how the paper deal with this type of, classical endogeneity. This is my first comment, which looks a bit technical. And the second comment is on population and demography. So I think, so in the regression, they do include the population with level, to capture the agglomeration or the market size effect. And also they put population with growth, right, to represent capital dilution effect. But specifically, I think the capital dilution effect may be dependent on the composition of the population. So when population is very young, the dilution can be smaller. This is something what we expect. So, but when population is aging, like Japan, maybe we have a much stronger negative impact on the economic growth. So I'm wondering whether the paper is capable to show more clearly this kind of heterogeneities in the sample. So, for instance, the paper put already with respect to institutions, for instance, low and high. I think you could do the same for the age composition, young and old compositions, something like this, to see how this capital diffusion term changes. Yeah. So this is my second comment. And the last point is more general. Yeah, so I really enjoyed the reading of the paper, but one question that comes to my mind is that whether this result is really, specific to Asia. What happens if we look at the same things, the same set of variables, similar specification, and if we run the regression for other group of developing economies like Africa and or Latin America. So throughout this type of analysis, I think we can somehow extract what is really specific in Asian economies. And related to this, I was really somehow, intrigued by the fact that the paper didn't find a significant impact on economic integration. So Jamer mentioned a bit how this variable was constructed, de jure or de facto, but through the title of the paper, I expected to see a very significant impact from this, variable, because if we believe in comparative advantage, deeper integration should really serve for higher growth. So I would like to see more why this is a case. Is it coming from the definition of the economic integration as an indicator, or is there any specific reason to let this variable speak more about the economic growth? I would like to see more detailed discussion on this point. So other comments are very minor, but yeah, so first, so the paper mentioned in the introduction, and Jusha also mentioned about the role of female in Asian economies, and importance to use female labors to boost economic growth. But in the formal analysis, this variable was not yet included, and I think that in the future, this is something you guys are planning to do. And I really happy to see, the outcome, how the integration of this female labor force participation interact, with other variables. And also, yeah, in the paper, Jusha and Jamer mentioned a lot about the flying geese model, but yeah, for me, for instance, as a relatively young economist, who were not very familiarized with this type of model, it was somehow hard to see, what's the connection between the findings and this model. So I think it would be really helpful if you put, a kind of conceptual chart, to map this model, flying geese models to your findings. So this is just a descriptive requirement. And the last point is about commodity dependence. Yeah. So I think investment efficiency increases when the commodity dependence is high. I'm somehow puzzled first because what I had in mind was a story laid down by Dutch disease. So maybe in the sample you have many young countries in terms of commodity investment. So that's why the marginal productivity of investment in commodity sector appears very, very high. But I like to see more detailed discussion about this commodity dependence and the story behind of your findings. So overall, I like the paper very much, and this is really a comprehensive view, and I learned a lot, and I'm very happy to see, the updated version in the very future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Hamano, also for keeping the time. I think there are a lot of interesting insights coming from the discussion, Professor Aizenman and Professor Sadui. Would you like to respond to that before we open up for Q&As?
So let me start responding, and Jamal will continue with. I think that we should definitely address your comments. And having said that, the commodity dependence is curse for a lot of countries. And you mentioned Africa, and to look at Africa and Latin America, it's fair to say that partially you cannot find any country in Africa or in Latin America that replicated the experience of, say, South Korea, partially because of the availability of commodities. And we know that typically, looking at Africa, this generates a lot of rent seeking and under education due to. So we think that this is a powerful mechanism, but because the charter was to focus on Asia, so we delivered this. Now, in the context of Asia, what we are thinking about the case of the flying geese and the like is precisely that Japan showed the power of technology at the time that they occupied Korea and China and the like. So you need such a historical link, and once that the China and became aware of the opportunities, and South Korea started replicating part of the experience of Japan earlier then. So they focused precisely on human capital, and it seemed to work very well. And here the literature is pointing out that when there is convergence, so it may be in the self-interest of Japan to invest directly in potentially in Korea or South Korea or China or maybe the US. So I think this is an important paradigm. And I think that the tragedy of Africa is the absence of this. And I think that Jamal looked at some of this. So go ahead and add your insight.
Yeah, thank you, thank you, Maza, for your very interesting comments. I think I agree with Joshua. We need to consider them, especially I like the looking perhaps a bit more about the age structure. That could be interesting. I think I already pulled some data about that. I will check that. But I expect that countries where the aging is stronger, maybe the capital dilution effect would also be stronger. So it's a kind of a super dilution, so to speak. The second point, which I think is very interesting, is about actually we have a convergence model, which is a regional convergence. So basically, a flying geese model is, as Joshua mentioned, some countries started to confront to the international competition and be very innovative, and then the other countries emulates the example and try to replicate. And that's why it is called a flying geese model, because you have one geese that started to fly, because this geese is a curious goose, sorry. And then the other ones follow this curious geese So something which is different with, for example, a region, as mentioned by Joshua, to which I was very interested in is North Africa and the Middle East. In North Africa and the Middle East, they made, unfortunately, the by choice of choosing import substitution and not be confronted to international competition. And in a sense, the fact that the biggest country in the region in terms of population, which is Algeria, choose import substitution, so you don't have the first goose that start to fly. And in this sense, the other goose will not fly and will not know this quite miracle growth in Asia, which is an outstanding performance in the history of humanity, if you had to remember that. So the contrast between Middle East and North Africa and Asia is very striking in this perspective. In terms of both in terms of the flying geese model, in terms of the absence of a leader model, a country that has started the process, and there is no coordination, which is related with the role of trade agreements. Basically, the model of Asia was very different. There is this literature or this concept of silent integration. The integration of organization of global value chain was not decided in a big conference. It was done in the countries by different diasporas that goes into Asia. So this was a bit different in Europe because there is this common goal of constructing a solid agriculture. So there is something, for me, it is surprising that trade agreements had no effect, but in the same time, it is not so surprising because you don't have a big, the number of, we took a cumulative number of trade agreements that include closest to integrate exchange technology, blah, blah, blah. In Europe, of course, you have the EU, and the number of this kind of agreements is very big for each country. But in Asia, it's not yet fully developed, so it is just a start. Maybe if you refer to what Daniel Rodriguez said about the future of globalization, he was talking about a few years ago about a shallow globalization concentrated with more intracontinental trade and less intercontinental trade. So maybe we have three big areas of trade, the Americas, Europe, and Asia. So maybe the future of Asia is to increase the intra-continental trade, and it can be organized with, of course, trade agreements to increase this and have a global value chain that have more focus on the region rather than all around the world. But overall, I would like to thank you so much for this very interesting comments, which will improve a lot of the paper. Thanks so much.
I fully agree with Jamal. Thank you. And the case of Latin America, the tragedy is that they also push the agenda of import substitution, and this is the failure of the takeoff. Mexico somehow benefited from NAFTA originally because this showed the way to elevate the standards of production such that that they could push the car industry. But now, with the new policies of the US, time will tell what will happen. So we are living now definitely in a totally new set of constraints.
Thank you, Professor Aizenman, Professor Sadoui. I have a question from the floor here. Jenny Corbett is asking a question. Is your concept of convergence about followers, countries, catching up to the income level of the leader. Your empirical specification looks as if the convergence is measuring the rate at which growth slows as the country's own income level rises. Can you please clarify on that?
So I think that we may clarify this in the context of the revisions.
Okay.
And the comments that the discussant provide us will allow us to answer this fully.
Excellent. Thank you, Professor Aizenman. Is there any questions from the floor? Okay. If not, then as a moderator, let me just ask one more questions to both of you. So basically, I'm trying to understand the results of your regressions analysis. And then I came to questions of whether or not the regression results are showing causation or just simply correlations. Between one thing that is a bit concerning for me is the fact that the impact of population growth on growth are consistently negative throughout the results. This may be due to the sample being selected, but at the same time, if I want to think a bit further of it, if you have a negative population growth, have it positive and significantly impacting your growth rates, then wouldn't this be a bit at odds with the fact that population aging is actually hurting growth in the future? How are we going to, how is your result going to sort these things out? So that results is a bit bothering to me. And the other thing is about the insignificance effect of economic integrations towards growth rates in Asia, while the indicators for economic integration being picked up might not be picking up a positive or negative impact on growth in the region. Is it robust for all different possible economic integration measurement? The question is more of whether or not that economic integration indicators that you are using should be the only one that is being looked at. I would perhaps like to see some robustness by using some alternative economic integration indexes being put into the regressions and see how the results holds. Thank you.
Thank you. If I may answer about population versus population growth, so that is something that we think about introducing the population growth in level, because usually in the capital in this kind of model we use a GDP per capita. Yeah, but in fact. The thing is, and it is something that I didn't check for other regions, there is any sort of correlation between population and population growth, which is, if it was the case, would be a problem if the two variables were too much correlated. And so the thing is, with this kind of setup, which is a bit unusual to standard literature, you can have because if I use the GDP per capita, the population growth will mix up two effects. The first one, which is the population dividend effect, which have been observed in the 90s, of course, in the 2000s, at the start of, for example, entering of China in WTO. And the effect, this capital dilution effect, which is in the Solow model. So in theory, it should be fine, but we are going to further check that point. That's a very good point. And the second point, and there is a point about endogeneity. I mean, in macro studies, you always have this problem of endogeneity, we're going to think about it more carefully to reinforce the strategy. The thing is, if you remove one of them, of the population growth variable, the science does not change. So it's not driven by, as I mentioned, this problem of too high correlated variables. Yeah, I don't know if I answered perfectly to a question, but at least some elements of answer.
Let me add a point which it's not easy to agree maybe, that a lot of the decline in fertility is the delayed outcome of human capital accumulation and exposure to policies. So if you are comparing, say, Afghanistan to India, you can guess that in India, the transition was and is faster than in Afghanistan and the like. So this raises important questions because this is the biggest really global challenge now. And the fact is that in China, we are learning from the history that the attempt to control the number of kids initially backfired, in the sense that now the regime is trying to encourage return to the days of higher fertility above replacement, and chances are that it will fail. So it goes back to the point that we are not controlling the history of China, but still, I think that we'll try to address this subject to our ability to do it. But the global transition is really something that started maybe early in Japan and in China and South Korea. And by now, all countries that are open enough in terms of culture and ability to make choices and education are flying in the same direction. But I agree that we will try to control for these factors in the regressions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Aizenman, Professor Dewey, and Professor Masashige. I think the answer is fair enough, and then we are looking forward for the